So today I read Earth 2 by Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley, and this was a really interesting alternate reality multiverse story. So it centers around the Justice League, but their Earth comes into contact with a completely polar opposite Earth, where like evil versions of them exist, and most importantly, the definitions and fundamental understandings of what good and evil are totally inverted. And the cover art does a really good job explaining this concept, because of course you turn it over and you have their alternate selves, Superwoman, Ultraman, and Owlman. So the artwork, I think in general throughout the entire piece, does a really good job of like representing like broader thematic elements. So it starts off with a plane crash in our world that we are familiar with, where Lex Luthor crashes down onto Earth, but this is a very different kind of Luthor. We get this beautiful full-page image of him, and he's like in a suit. And shockingly, the most shocking thing about him that we learn is that he's a good person, which, if you know anything about the character of Lex Luthor, is extremely disorienting. He goes into his office and he like gives his employees raises, and he's not the personification of evil. Basically what they discover is that there was a plane crash on Earth where all the bodies were dead, but their hearts were on the right sides of their bodies, and everything was like inverted and flipped, and the money they had was really weird. And exists in Earth 2, which is where this good Luthor is from, and there was also an identical plane crash with humans from our normal Earth, and that these sort of two crashes happened at the same time, created some sort of rift in between the two opposite worlds. So Luthor meets up with the Justice League, and he's like, hey guys, I need your help. I'm the only good person on my planet, Earth 2. And instead of the Justice League, there's something called the Crime Syndicate. And it has all of their alter egos, and they're just pure evil, and they run everything that's corrupt and miserable. And because the Justice League are good people, they feel it is upon them, like the onus is on them to go to the second Earth and free the people. And we get a look at the second Earth, and it is so interesting because everything is different, everything is wrong. We have Owlman, which is like this world's Batman. He's having like an illicit affair with Superwoman, who was later revealed to be Lois Lane. Good is bad. They're like the Crime Syndicate is totally evil. Like Superman is totally mischaracterized, and the president is like taking bribes to them. It's totally messed up. What I found really interesting was we get a look at this police commissioner, and this is Batman after he's arrived on Earth, and they're sort of have a back and forth. And so this is Commissioner Wayne. So already we have that interesting familial connection. And something that I found interesting is that Commissioner Wayne is first sort of presented as the one good force in this world. Like he wants like a clean city, like he's trying to like fight the evil or whatever. But this itself actually also gets subverted and becomes evil, because later on when the Justice League is able to temporarily like capture and subdue the Crime Syndicate, Batman is again speaking to the commissioner, and the commissioner says, like, I'm gonna build a new Gotham. Sounds good. But then he says, I'm putting a wall around this city, making it self-sufficient and strong and clean. Okay, maybe it could still be good. Anyone who doesn't like it gets a bullet in the face. So the fundamental logic or illogic of this world to us is still intact. He is no different. And he says, of course, like, and I'll want Owlman back here for trial and execution, of course. Not trial that may end up in execution. No, we're going to kill him. And you can just see the look on Batman's face here, which I think is just perfect. Like, he is just, of course, like, he understands that they can't fundamentally change this reality. Because in the time that the Crime Syndicate has been subdued, they've been doing humanitarian efforts. They've been rebuilding monuments, they've been trying to feed the people, but it just doesn't work because the fundamental reality of this universe is just so polar opposite. Now, I really, really appreciated getting to look at the inverted reality of the second Earth, but I think that when it comes to an accessibility towards readers, you need to have a pretty solid understanding of these characters and of the DCU beforehand to understand it. Because somebody who isn't familiar with, Bruce Wayne's backstory won't understand the significance of the Commissioner Wayne character. And the same way, I think someone who isn't, familiar with the character of Superman won't understand, how disparate Ultraman is. So you do need a little bit of background knowledge to appreciate this. So I would not recommend this particular piece to somebody who isn't already familiar with the DCU and these characters. But if you do have that background information, I think it is so, so interesting, because this is a very cerebral piece. It's literally holding up a mirror to the original DC Earth, which is quite similar to ours, and it's saying, what would that look like? Because I think that in general, we have an understanding of good prevailing over evil, and, the art we make tends to reflect that, but this doesn't, and I think that is super interesting. But going back to that sort of, you need to know the background. So for me personally, I actually had never seen Martian Manhunter before, so I didn't appreciate the nuances about his character or his, alter ego's character. So I'm sure there's tons of stuff there that I personally missed. So I think that is something to keep in mind. Yeah. So eventually, the Crime Syndicate ends up also going back to the original Earth, so the two groups have totally flip-flopped, and they're, wreaking havoc on Earth. And we have this really, crushing scene where Owlman finds the grave of Thomas and Martha Wayne. And for me, I almost did see, a moment of humanity here, or, something that I think we would recognize as, goodness. And he doesn't really dwell on it. He doesn't change, because these people don't seem particularly capable of change. I mean, just as incapable of change as the Justice League are, and how good they will always continue to be. So as a criticism I can make of both groups. But the most interesting, so Brainiac is revealed to be the villain behind all of this, because on the second Earth, Ultraman has him enslaved, and he, comes up with this plan so that he can gain control of everything and have the two Earths collide. But what's most interesting is that the Justice League has to win by losing. So really interesting inversion following this opposite logic, and ends up working. Ultraman destroys Brainiac. But the most interesting part of this entire story to me is how at the end, the Earth 2, despite all the efforts that the Justice League made while they were there for a couple days, completely returns to the way that it was. And maybe at first this seems like a failure. Oh no, the the world's gonna be terrible again, and corruption, all of this, but it all comes down to what perspective are you looking at? Because the definitions of the words good and evil are entirely dependent on society's agreement on what they mean. And they don't themselves have inherent meaning. And they say multiple times, this is a world where those definitions are flipped. Then what might look like suffering to us, or injustice to us or the Justice League, because that's who our perspective is aligned with, just might not be suffering or injustice for them. And maybe our version of justice is their version of injustice. And then who are we to change that? First of all, they can't change that. They try and they fail. We see that very explicitly. But also, do they have any right to? I think that is a really interesting premise that this graphic novel poses. And I think it has a lot of real-world applications as well, when we're talking about maybe other people and their perspectives that maybe we can't understand. And Wonder Woman does have some sort of conception about this. I'm going to try and find the panel because I thought it was very interesting and self-reflective. But they're basically cleaning up the second Earth, or their definition of that. And Superman says to her, something about all this makes me uneasy, Diana. Where does crime end and politics begin on this world? And she says, Ours is a humanitarian mission, Superman, not a political one. Surely, we're giving the future back to these poor people. So there is like some sort of conception that they understand that maybe our version of good isn't their version of good, and maybe we're actually in the wrong here. I think it's really complex, but it is super interesting. And I think that if you have an understanding of the basic DCU universe and these characters, this is absolutely worth a read because it will make you think.